Perfect. I'd certainly be pre-ordering that whenever it's out, Professor. That's so beautifully articulated. Although before I would like to flesh out a bit more your differences between Zizek and how you're tackling this problem. But if we could, let's say, devil's advocate a bit. So a lot of people recently have been buying into the idea of panpsychism. So in many
Yeah.
ways, what I see is because from the objects, the subject emerges, and the subject can't be reduced to the object on emergence, they tend to prescribe to this object some kind of properties of a subject. So they say every entity in the universe in some way is conscious. So how would you respond to a panpsychist? Through your theory of transcendental materialism or dialectical naturalism, and where do you think that theory, that ontology of panpsychism is lacking?
Yeah, what's interesting is I've also been thinking about some of this recently, in part thanks to a few of my doctoral students. For example, I had one who recently defended a dissertation on Schelling, the early Schelling's philosophy of nature, and the way David Chalmers talks about panpsychism in his work on philosophy of mind. And with using Chalmers here as a convenient reference, and someone whose work, especially if you have a good number of analytic listeners, most of them would be at least passingly familiar with. Um, what I'm about to say is just like with Freud and Beyond the Pleasure Principle, highly tentative. But I've become increasingly tempted by an aspect of Chalmers's approach, which I think expresses the same sort of concerns that motivate some people now to turn to panpsychism, but doesn't require actually buying into full-blown panpsychism. Um, so, I should begin by saying I don't find full-blown panpsychism at all persuasive. I mean, you can start just at a very naive, commonsensical level, which is that, in terms of what prompts any of us to attribute mindedness to something that we come across. Why I, for instance, ascribe mindedness to you while talking to you right now, despite just being limited to having this image on my computer screen, and all of this sensory perceptual content that I could just attribute to my own mind if I were, say, a solipsist. Of course, when we posit the existence, however explicitly or implicitly, of other minds, we do so because we're prompted by what we take to be evidence expressive of some mindedness on that side, that you react to me in certain ways, that you engage in particular behaviors that seem to be purposive and directed towards a specific aim and or goal, that you have reactions that seem to indicate feeling states that I'm familiar with in myself, etc. And so that leads me to attribute a mind to you. And of course, when it comes to what we experience as inanimate nature writ large, it doesn't seem like we have very good reason for thinking that, the desk on which my computer sits right now is itself minded. I don't think, even at a commonsensical level. But then, when you start getting into more scientifically informed empirical details, right? That there does, and here's where, for me, it is always important to keep, of the natural scientific references, biology and especially neurobiology in mind. The kinds of the forms of experience, of mindedness, of subjectivity that we have, as far as we know, does require a highly complex type of object, the kind of peculiar entity that is the human central nervous system in all of its mind-boggling, astronomical complexity, right? And that does seem to be, it's I certainly am open to the idea of multiple realizability. I think that there are various physical systems that, could potentially or actually instantiate something that we might be willing to qualify as mindedness. But I certainly don't think that, any old bunch of atoms, molecules, et cetera, are going to generate that. So I think that mindedness is not universally distributed across all of material reality, across the entire physical universe. I don't really see any compelling reason to accept that. And in fact, I see a lot of both commonsensical and scientific reasons to believe that no, there are only, these very small isolated instances of material configurations in nature that support mindedness. For instance, the central nervous systems of various organisms that we know of, right? But what I like about Chalmers in dealing with the hard problem of consciousness in this vein is that his work allows for the possibility of saying, well, the thing is that qualitative consciousness, right? This experience of qualia, as Chalmers highlights in his account of the hard problem of consciousness, that Chalmers' speculation that perhaps the what it is like of various qualia are are just brute fundamental facts of nature along with other things, and that. But that, of course, these facts of nature that are qualia, and unlike with panpsychism, are not just universally equitably distributed across the entire expanse of the physical universe or of all of material natural reality. That you have these discrete, small, localized pockets where qualia arise, and that qualia, although they emerge from certain physical systems, that at least as far as our understanding can get, that maybe there is this spade turning quality to them in terms of, well, why is it that a certain wavelength of light has the qualitative quality to us. I'm sorry, qualitative, is a quality, or has this sort of feel to it of what it is like to see a certain shade of red, right? And that, it may be that there isn't any further explanation that can be offered there. We just have to take it as it's just a brute, stupid fact of nature, like any other fact of nature, that it just so happens that in a physical being with a central nervous system configured like ours, that the visual apparatus encountering this wavelength of light will generate this corresponding qualitative state of consciousness that is the qualia of that shade of red, right? And there's just a certain ultimate just brute facticity of the matter to it, that we're perfectly comfortable accepting about various and sundry laws of nature, et cetera. And that I think Chalmers' proposal that there might just be these brute factual relationships between, say, certain wavelengths on the light spectrum and certain visual qualitative experiences, that's just another one of those brute facts of nature, and that at that point we can of course draw the parallels in terms of certain aspects of how our central nervous system functions and those corresponding qualitative states of conscious awareness. But that, at that point, perhaps our job is more or less done. That again, there is that spade turning quality. It's just, well, it is what it is. I mean, in the same way that any other aspect of nature is what it is. And so I think that's not when Chalmers is willing to speculate about full-blown panpsychism, but rather when he's willing to say that, like the panpsychist, consciousness might just be something fundamental to nature, or a fundamental aspect of nature. But then there's the option of, you don't have to, if you accept that, you don't have to end up as a panpsychist where you just evenly distribute that across the entire expanse of what exists at the physical level, but just say only a certain set of physical configurations are able to have, corresponding with them, these also primitive natural states that are qualia.